इसके लिए जो संघर्ष था, जमीन का संघर्ष, कागज का संघर्ष, मनरेगा स्कीम को बनाने के बाद उसको नियम बनाना, उसके बाद उसे लागू करवाना, उसे ठीक करवाना, इसको हर स्टेज पर आप इन्वॉल्व रहे हैं। तो हमारे पास वो तमाम लोग हैं जिनसे हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि एक रोशनी मिलेगी। So first of all, I'll request Professor Prabhat Patnaik to put this entire thing in a larger perspective, which is what the whole country looks up to you for, sir.
Thank you very much. The Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Act, Guarantee Act, was a unique piece of legislation in post-independence India. Before that, you had various employment schemes, but it was the first time that employment guarantee was provided as a matter of right to individuals. It was not, of course, a universal right. Everybody could not get employment upon demand, but for every household, there was the guarantee that a person would get employment on demand. Now, this was a legislation which was adopted not just by a majority vote in Parliament. It was adopted after considerable discussion. It was adopted by building a consensus, and it was adopted by unanimously by all political parties, and it had the support of all mass organizations. The nation as a whole willed that such an act should be passed. It was, even though not legally perhaps, substantively like a constitutional provision. You cannot undo such a right, you cannot undo such a provision through a mere majority in the Lok Sabha. In other words, these are issues which to my mind are meta-majority vote. In other words, they are above majority vote. They cannot be undone by a majority vote. It's another thing, if you can create another consensus in the country that this legislation is no longer required. But until that happens, you cannot simply undo such rights-based legislation or rights-providing legislation by simply a majority in Parliament. I should add that when originally the legislation was adopted, it had the support of all parties, including parties that are part of the NDA. So if those parties wish to change their minds, then they have to create an alternative consensus in the country. And that is not what is happening. And I feel incensed that we are actually having people's rights being taken away simply by moving a bill in Parliament. I think that's completely wrong. It's reprehensible because of this. It's reprehensible because, after all, MGNREGA has been a source of providing livelihoods to large numbers of households in a situation where people's conditions are really becoming extremely distressed. MGNREGA was a support, and that support is being withdrawn. Don't get fooled by all this talk about 125 days. 125 days is not for every household on demand. 125 days is limited to some pockets that the government is going to specify, central government is going to specify. So it is not as if the original legislation which created a right is being extended from 100 to 125 days. That is the impression that is sometimes created. That's completely wrong. It is a right that is being snatched away. And of course, it is something which is completely encroaching on the jurisdiction, on the rights, on the finances of state governments. You cannot just one day announce that, look, from now on 40% of this is going to be met by state governments. And that's true, the state governments are going to meet this from their limited resources and additionally in accordance with norms provided by the central government. So the central government would provide the norms, would tell the state government what they should do, and they have to file the money for doing that, which is as if the state governments are vassals of the central government. So in every conceivable sense, what we are seeing is a reprehensible piece of legislation, and I think it must be opposed tooth and nail.